Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak about something that probably no doubt everyone's had some issues with, struggles with, and it's something that obviously is an ongoing thing. So yeah, my name's Julian Wallis. I'm CEO at Intuji, and yeah, going to be here today talking to you about the discovery crisis and why projects are failing before they even kick off. So this is recently a project that came to us when we worked on, but was a familiar story that no doubt you probably can relate to. It was 6 months, nearly $1 million, and a total failure. It was a large-scale B2B digital transformation. It had a range of applications and systems involved in it, and the company that had come to us after the fact had nearly spent $1 million just shy of it, getting to this point, and essentially we started again. And it involved a series of applications regarding customer portals and ERP, etc., trying to essentially transform their digital customer experience. But really what was clear and obvious and evident is that not enough discovery was done, and the discovery that was done was not aligned with the business and the stakeholders, and unfortunately is an all too common story, I'm sure. Who can put their hands up here, anyone that's been involved in a project that's either had issues or missed requirements, stakeholders, or you found out later on in the project. Anyone had any issues there? Yeah, we've all been there, and it continues to be a challenge. I guess a bit of background about me, for those that may not be familiar with it. I founded Intuji at 15, so I've grown that agency now to today where we're a team of over 50, and we work globally with brands, and we've worked with multiple billion-dollar companies around the globe, and still to this day, on their digital transformations, and our main focus is around B2B. And I have had the privilege to share stages and different various mediums of content with some very, very intelligent people in content around customer experience and digital transformation as well. So no doubt you can probably all relate to this as well, but 70 to 80% of digital transformation projects fail, and most of the failures are not technical. They could have been prevented earlier on in the process had we aligned the outcomes and the stakeholders to actually what we were trying to achieve. And it's an all too common story, especially in the space that we work in, where either we've missed deadlines, the product doesn't work, we release it, customers hate it, hopefully not, but they may not enjoy the feature, etc. Or it just might be in general where we've tried to achieve something and we may not have even had the technical expertise to deliver it, whatever it is. And the key today, I want to give you some tools and some experience, I guess, from what we've learnt across these larger scale projects as to how we've combated this and how we've really tackled it. But I guess there's three key things that I've experienced and seen across the board that I feel leads to this misalignment in discovery. And the first one is checkbox syndrome. You might be asking what checkbox syndrome is, but essentially it's going through requirements and discovery for the sake of doing it. We all know where that's happened in a project where essentially we're going through grabbing superficial requirements, high-level requirements. Maybe we've met with a couple of stakeholders and done a workshop or two, and we're like, yeah, no, we know what we need to do, we just need to crack on with this. And there's no deep understanding of what we're actually trying to achieve in the business or in the product. And as said, instead we're just essentially grabbing these superficial requirements, I call it a glorified bullet point list, but essentially we're not going deep enough to understand what is going to drive real value in the project and how we can assure that our focus is going to be return on investment for whoever's either the investors in the product or the business in general, whoever we're implementing it for. And another key thing that we've seen in this particular area is mapping processes or laying things out. It might even be a paper-based process. It might even be a completely new product or an idea that we're doing. Mapping it doesn't mean understanding it. and so much of the time teams that are working on these projects do not have the core fundamental understanding of the business and or what we're trying to achieve. And so essentially we're there ticking a box but not actually understanding what we're trying to achieve. The second one, feature obsession. Now, who of us here can put a hand up that haven't put a product or a feature in a product or done something or wanted to do something because we've seen it somewhere else, right? As we're familiar with now, AI is all the hype, right? There's a lot of stuff getting around with that. I'm not going to focus too much on it specifically, but there's companies that are doing extremely well, and there's companies that are just implementing it for the sake of implementing it, which is exactly kind of backing up the point here. But it's like, all right, how we get return is not just by pumping features, just overloading features into a product or a project that we're trying to deliver. It's making sure that what those features that we focus on are the ones that actually deliver value. And I guess one of the key messages I want everyone to take away from today is outcomes drive success, not feature lists. And I feel that's a massively misunderstood thing. I know for myself, from my own experience and growth of growing to understand that, where it's easy to, I guess, to get distracted by features, or we're like, yeah, this is cool, let's do this, or let's add this in, users are going to love this. And when you actually step back at it and go, okay, is it actually leading us to where we want to be from an outcome perspective? Most of the time, we could say that maybe it's distracting us. The final one is hidden stakeholders, and I'm sure we're all familiar with this as well, where either there's missed requirements from the beginning leading to misaligned assumptions. It could be high-level directors, executives involved in a project. It could be a high-level engineer. It could be anyone really, but someone that's missed out in the discovery process, and we get halfway through the project and we're like, that's nothing like what we wanted it to be. And so many times, I guess the challenge with these kind of projects is a lot of the time where we're working, especially in these projects, is the executives or leaders or those stakeholders don't necessarily understand the gravity of the impact that can have, and the cascading effect of coming in later with a whole heap of requirements or a complete change of direction. Now, obviously, we've got to be malleable and we have got to be agile in regards to dealing with those changes, but if it's a complete change of direction, it causes a lot of issues. Another thing that we've seen a lot is a lack of buy-in from the beginning comes back to bite you at the end. And essentially, you've got someone that maybe a project got ticked off for approval, you're developing a new product, whatever it is, but they're like, yeah, let's do it, let's do this, or it might be even a new push of features, etc., for a product. But it's a bit like, yeah, we're doing it for the sake of doing it over against, we believe this is where we need to be and this is what we need to do. And again, comes later down the line and it's that resistance comes out and we don't have the buy-in and support we need to keep things moving. And the final one, I'm sure we're all familiar with this as well, but late discoveries blow out scopes and budgets and or resource levels. Now there's some things that we can't control, obviously, but we want to find those things out as early on in the process as we possibly can to try and mitigate that. We can't mitigate everything, it's impossible. Otherwise we could spend 2 years on discovery and not actually get anywhere in implementation. That's not the point, but we need to be focusing on what can we control and how do we as quickly as possible get control of that and then move on from there. I guess just to recap that cost of, what actually happens when we don't get it right is, I think one of the biggest ones that is often overlooked, a couple of these on here as well, but is like lost time and momentum, where not only have we not delivered when we wanted to deliver, but the momentum, we know the stakeholders, we know everyone else involved in the project is just like, leads to team burnout, essentially. And we lose that backing and we lose that support. And essentially it's a thing of trust, I guess. And damaged relationships, this has happened, we've seen this happen between team members when the pressure's on, when things haven't been done properly, blame games can start, etc. And it can happen again between clients or product managers, others, etc. But relationships between the teams can deteriorate. I think one of the key ones is the missed opportunities as well, which is how long, if we haven't delivered this for, let's say we've delayed for 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, what have we missed out on in the meantime where we could have been, again, that compounding effect, we could have been even further ahead than where we are, but instead we may have lost, in some of the cases that we've seen, years of progress, and even stepped backwards when projects have tried to be implemented. And it's essentially cost the business not only that time, but in that time, what's that cost the business in value-wise, or the product. So our focus has been shifting to trying to focus on discovery that drives real value, and real value in business value. And I guess the main point is we're focusing on impact and business outcomes to unlock what actually matters within the business, rather than focusing on a features list or something like that there. But we're trying to identify what matters to the business, what is the outcome that is going to generate that return for the business or the product, that essentially we can demonstrate ROI very clearly and easily. And again, shifting from that feature mindset to an outcomes-based mindset, where we're looking at an outcome and then everything that we're working on is driving towards that outcome there. And just here is identifying real problems. And I know that probably sounds, I'd say, cliche necessarily, but obvious. But how often it's not actually the case that it's done. And the most important thing here is if we don't find the real problem, we waste time solving the wrong one. And whether that's from a user experience perspective, whether that's a business that's having struggle with a certain particular problem or something like that, but there's, I guess, lost time and lost focus on that. And how do we start with a business objective? And that may be, for example, for someone that, use an example of something that we do, but for a business that may be a large-scale enterprise and they're doing 1% of their revenue online or through digital means, they're looking in the next 3 years to get that to 40-50%. Rather than us going and focusing on everything that we can do from the digital customer experience side, whether we talk about building an app or we talk about releasing a customer portal, but all the features within it. But I guess, what is the key metric, the one single metric from the business's perspective that we need to focus on, that then if we achieve that, nothing else matters. They don't, at the end of the day, they don't care, whether that's product or business, they don't care how we get there, right? They just care that we get there. And if we can agree on that, there's a big difference between saying, oh yeah, but we've done all these deployments and we've done this, we've built that. To them, it's like, what have I got in return? And I guess part of that is questioning every requirement and the impact it's going to have on the project and or business. And I know for myself, the mistakes I've made with this is like, it's easy to skip it over and just assume a lot of this comes from assumptions, especially when you've been close to a product or a business and you're building something and you think that, yeah, no, this is exactly what we need to do. We don't need to worry about doing any more research, or we don't need to worry about even speaking with customers and or users. And we end up going down this line where it's all our idea. And then when we release it, we're kind of like, oh, it didn't work as intended. And I guess the other key one as well is looking for patterns in feedback for opportunities. We've worked with customers on projects where we've spoken to their customers and or users and done, again, third-party research for exactly this. And we've identified opportunities where businesses, this is on the commerce perspective, they were missing out on double their spend at a minimum annually, just simply by not having the workflows and the user journey and the features that they needed. But instead, this business thought that they were crushing it, basically, and they'd had a great portal because they had grown, if that makes sense, they'd grown their digital spend or the share of spend from their business revenue. But they hadn't gone to customers looking for that pattern of feedback and saying, okay, we thought we needed X, Y, and Z, but instead we actually need to focus on here. I guess, who here has released something or a feature, whether it's in a product or released a project as a whole, and it hasn't had the impact that you've wanted from a user or customer perspective? How many? A lot. And we've all been there. But a lot of it comes back to we haven't validated it properly and assumed that we know what we need to solve. The second one, again, on this, just shifting this from this features-based thinking to like outcomes-based discovery, is like understanding the levers that we can pull that are going to generate the return for the business. And to sum it up here, as I've written here, but if you don't pull the right levers, we won't get meaningful change. And I was having a conversation with someone else about this on my podcast actually the other day. I think it was Jared Spool, if any of you know Jared Spool or not. He's a UX researcher from America. He's had a lot of experience. But we were talking about, with this specific thing, not in the exact same context, but the idea is that if we don't understand the business and everyone working on the product, and that doesn't just involve business analysts or people doing discovery, designers, developers, if we can't articulate how we're driving value and what levers we're actually driving with what we're doing in our work, how do we know how we actually need to perform? Right? How do we know how our work is impacting the overall outcome of the project or the product? And he went as far as to say, you should be able to go to anyone on the team, doesn't matter what your role is, and say, whose life is this going to improve by implementing this? And I want a name of a specific person. And I can say for ourselves on the project we've done, we couldn't do that every time, if that makes sense. So you got to learn from that and say, okay, that means understanding that we know exactly why we're doing what we're doing and what it means for the business. Because it's easy, and I know this for myself, but as someone working on the project specifically, whether it's design or as development as we discussed, but it is easy just to go, oh, my job is I've got to use a story here, I'm just going to design or develop it, whatever it is, and have no understanding of what the end result's going to be and how we're impacting the business from that perspective. I think there's a couple of key areas listed here as well, but revenue drivers, how we're going to generate revenue for the business, obviously operational efficiency, this could be internal tools or external things as well, but how you're helping your customers potentially. The customer satisfaction metrics is another one, a bit harder to track, a bit more subjective as well. Competitive differentiation, this is an interesting one that we focus on and try and get some ideas around from an industry perspective for our kind of projects. And then obviously market positioning is very closely related to that. But if you can tie some outcomes for the product of the business and the project back to these things, we'll have much better success demonstrating our return and our time. And the next one, I think, which is related to this, is stakeholder value mapping. We would be all familiar with stakeholders and what stakeholders are, but how often we either don't fully understand the differences between the different stakeholders and what actually success means to them. And oftentimes it can be merged together in a bit blurred lines, I guess, is the way to put it. But it's different stakeholders clearly have different perspectives and different ideas of success and what that means to them. And we can get this down to a user level. That's one point, absolutely. There's different stakeholders from a user level, and that is exactly the same thing, different ideas of success. But there's also, from the business perspective, and in the environments we work in, you typically have a couple of key stakeholders, and one that is basically always overlooked is an investor. But you have your customer, for the customer of that business, the business themselves and what that means for them, and then you've also got the investors, but then within that as well you've got different stakeholders between those different silos as well. But when we understand what success looks like for each person, it's a lot harder for us. Well, who here relates to, I guess, feeling like you're struggling to prove value to a particular stakeholder, or something like someone's questioning something and you know what you've done, if that makes sense, but you've been misaligned from the beginning of the project, and then it gets halfway through to the end of the project and you, I guess, feel like you're getting doubted, right? Or you're struggling to prove that value and show that you're aligned. And I know we've had this, but every time we've traced it back is we didn't do a good enough job at the beginning of saying, okay, what does this look like for you? And if we're going to look 6 months, and not just asking, again, a superficial question, if we look 6 months ahead, what does success look like? But going deeper than that and understanding what actually, again, moves the lever for them. But then how do we measure that? Coming back to the previous slide as well, but how do we measure that? And then reporting on it is another thing as well, but obviously that's more on the ongoing client communication. We're talking about discovery here, but that is an important thing. And the final thing is, are there any conflicts? And what I mean by that is we've seen in projects ourselves, and no doubt you would have probably experienced it as well, but is when stakeholders, they may not even know it themselves, but when you start working with them, you end up realise that there's conflicts there between the two of them. And what the worst thing for that to come out is halfway or at the end of the project. Because you've been working with, we've had this, for example, we've had dedicated points of contact on large-scale projects. We've been working, and a stakeholder's come in, halfway through and said, no, we need to do this, 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 and this, and this, right? And it's completely out of, I guess, left field, and it is conflicting everything, well, not everything, but what we've been told up until this point, and means that we have to now go back and either refactor things, completely re-architect journeys, etc., like that. And the mistake is we haven't identified clear enough and or set the expectations in the beginning that this is, if we don't have all of these details and if there are any other stakeholders we're not aware of, etc., I guess aligning those expectations with those individuals so we don't run into that. Focusing on outcomes, as I said, it's kind of been the theme here, and that is the theme I want you to take away from this is, if it's anything, but is focusing on impact and outcomes rather than requirements. And I've met, again, really successful engineers and teams as well that do really good work, but every time, even the way they measure the impact of their work is how many deployments they've done or how many things that they've shipped. Right? I'm just talking specifically about engineers, but not to pick on them, but at the end of the day, it's like there is no clear indication back to how are we and how is that tied, that specific thing tied back to an outcome for the product or the business, and what impact is that having on the long term of the product and or the business. And I think a key one is to keep it simple and measurable, and something that, especially if you're working with non-technical stakeholders, so this is even more important, this just all amplifies it. And a lot of the work we do is with more non-technical people. We do have technical people in regards to stakeholders as well, but there is non-technical people involved, which means that they don't understand as much of the work as what we're doing as we would. But how do we set that? As I explained earlier, we take that example of that revenue share from digital, non-digital, from 1% to 50%, for example. What is going to drive that? And we may go and release, we might spend a week redesigning a new animation, for example, because that's what we want to do, and we've done that specifically. But when we look back and analyse it, we realise that maybe at this point in time it wasn't the highest value return thing that we could have been focusing on. Instead, had we got success and got return, for example, if we taking that example metric I provided before, but had we been on the pathway to getting that share up to 20%, 25, 30%, again, stakeholders, even from an investment point of view and a resources point of view, are keen to pump that in, keen to keep that investment going because they know they're getting the return. And I guess the reporting from a perspective is simplified, and they can understand it and know we're on the right direction. I guess the final point of this here is it's clearly tied back to real value. So much, and I say this myself as well, just learning from experience, but so much of the projects that we can do focus on either this new technology, this new library, or something that we're implementing and the flashy features of whatever we're doing, but it fails to communicate the actual, at the end of the day, the nuts and bolts, I guess, of the value of what we're doing. And we lose people. And obviously this applies specifically more to non-technical stakeholders as well, but we lose people in, I guess, that support and momentum, coming back to it, what I discussed earlier with those issues. And once we've lost that momentum and trust, it's hard to get it back. And the final point on this one here I wanted to touch on was just continuous validation. Discovery is not a one-off thing, as you know, especially if you're working on a fixed project. For example, a digital transformation project, yes, there is a start and end date, but as we know, they're very blurred as well. But if you work on a product, this is even different and more important. But is regular stakeholder check-ins, and we've had projects as well where the project itself was going extremely well. We were getting the results, but we just weren't communicating with, I guess, some of the stakeholders that were less involved, important stakeholders, but were less involved, and we weren't communicating enough with them, and they felt the project was going off the rails, even though it was running exactly and better than expected. But again, it's on us to learn from that, to go, okay, those regular check-ins not only enable us to update them on what's happening and what the progress is, but things shift, right? Especially over longer period. If we're doing a 4-week project, then that's a different story. If you're working on something for 12 months, 18 months, things change. The bigger the business get, the more things change. And you've got to be ready for that and adapt to that. But it still needs to follow this process of understanding that business and having those regular check-ins. I guess a couple of other points is using data from the business to make these decisions. And again, coming back to, rather than just going on intuition, it's great. Especially if you've been around a product or a business for a long time, you know necessarily what a customer may want, or you would know, the direction you need to take. But go and try and find the data that backs that up, and don't just validate your own assumptions on your own. And obviously, wireframe testing is a great way in discovery to quickly put a concept together, get something out there without us going and investing a heap of time in development. I've seen this with teams as well, where something that could have been done in maybe a week with a simple low fidelity wireframe, tested out, put stakeholders, either written off or adjusted, whatever it needed to be. Months of development work has been put into it only for it to be getting told, and it gets launched, and they're like, that is not what we want whatsoever. And who can relate to that? And not only is it frustrating for them, it's demoralising for us, all right? Because how much effort and time, blood, sweat and tears has been put into some of these things only to get told you're completely off the mark. And again, it comes back to just that misalignment from the beginning. And those feedback loops, just constantly getting that feedback, checking in as much as we can. And if we do need to adjust our course, we can do it in smaller increments rather than finding out 6 months later that we've got to do a 90, like a left turn, and just go in a completely different direction. We're already prepared for that. So 3 things you can take away from today, I would suggest, in questions that would just uncover a few things. And these are not the only 3 that we work with, but these are, I guess, questions that get you thinking differently is the most important thing. And that's probably a summary of discovery and how you should do discovery in general. But is like, if we could only solve one problem today, like what would that be, and how would that make basically everything else easier or irrelevant? You can adjust this to be like, if you're a product, I guess, as a business, SaaS product, something like that there, but if you said if we only had one feature, what would drive 80% of our revenue, right, essentially? That's not necessarily one single feature like a login feature, right? But you get the point. Like, the idea is, if we had one core offering, and maybe we have a look at that and go, we've been focusing on other things for 6 months when we should have been focusing on developing this, and we probably could have got years ahead of where we are. How do we measure success just beyond just delivery, and what large lasting change must this project create? Again, same thing where it's like, we're not just measuring on our deployments or how many designs we've done or everything else. We're measuring, coming back to those outcomes. What specifically have we moved the needle on? Have we adjusted, pulled the lever? Have we made an impact on the business and or the product that we can point very specifically back to and know we did this, right? Over against stakeholders coming in and saying, well, yeah, there's heaps of things that could have done that. And the final thing is, who in our organisation holds the power to make or break this project, and have we brought them in early enough? Again, a painful lesson that we've learned we've learnt it for a long time now, but it is identifying those people. As I said, it could be even an investor, right? And it might be, from that perspective, someone that's working on a product here, and or it could be an enterprise transformation or something like that there. But you may not, like that investor may at the beginning may be like, yeah, that's fine, I don't care, you just do whatever you want to do, and I've got the confidence, and we've had this before as well, I've got the confidence in the team here to deliver this, I don't need to worry about it. Yet 6 months later, when we did everything that team said, that investor come back in and said, no, I don't agree, like should have been, and it's like, well, this is what you said at the beginning. And so I guess it's like aligning with them and outlining to them that, okay, if you're accepting that, you can't come to us in 6 months' time and say X, Y, and Z, basically. Because if you do, at that point, we're already going to be down this track. And I guess it's just key to identify those people. And I guess it's not just about identifying problems. And we talked a lot about problems. I don't want to be negative, but it's like identify the people that you can move the needle for, and they'll keep funding the project, like positively. And if you understand from their perspective, this is what I want, and you make it happen for them, there you go. And that same thing applies from a business perspective to whether a product perspective, and that's obviously customers. But so many teams say that we're customer centric, we do customer research and all this. When you ask them something specifically, they've sent out a survey. Right? Like seriously, that's all they've done. How much have you gone and sat down with customers, observed what they're doing, actually understood their business, and even come up with things that they didn't think were possible? And part of this isn't like just going to them saying, what do you want, right? Like, we've got to think deeper than that and identify again where that real value is, and go to them and said, hypothetically, if we could do X, Y, and Z, what impact would that have on your business financially? How much could we save you doing X, Y, and Z? Then suddenly what was worth, whatever it is, X, could be worth 4 times that to that particular business. So yeah, that's it from me for now. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions and answer anything for you. So thank you. If you want, I can do this one if you want.
Hi. Oh, first question.
Hi, I'm Jodie Binus. I'd like to ask, yes, it's really important to focus on that one thing that is going to make the impact, make the income come in and all that sort of stuff. But there are so many details in a project, like security, like UX, like training, like, I could list go
Yep.
on. How do you balance that out? Like UX, user experience for the users who are going to be using this is so important.
Yep.
And they're training and they're comfortable with
Yep.
using the system.
Yep.
How do you balance that out with probably the senior executive being a bit more of a visionary and just saying, I just need this.
Yep.
But the actual users, the other stakeholders
Yep.
that don't have that power are saying, no, we actually need a really simple way of doing the data entry or
Yep.
things like that.
Yeah, very, very good question. And I don't think it's an either or. Like, there's 2 different things that you need to manage, right? Which is where you've got that senior executive and you've got the outcomes for them. You've also got the outcomes for the users, right? Which it might be that specific thing. We still need those user stories, however you want to do it, how different teams do different things, but however you want to list out your requirements, you still need all that. But most importantly, from the beginning, all of that is funneling up to that particular outcome. At the end of the day, if you analyse it, we shouldn't be doing anything from a user experience perspective that isn't affecting that outcome, right? So if you're trying to make it easier, a simple flow for data entry, at the end of the day, if it is to, let's just say, increase our share of digital revenue or something like that, that will impact that, if that makes sense. So it's super important, but I guess the details, I'm talking more here on non-technical stakeholders, but the details to the non-technical, they honestly don't care about that. Most of it would go over their head, but essentially what they want to know is that, okay, this particular solution is going to get me to here, I want you to do the rest of the work, but we're aligned on that outcome there. So I totally agree with you, that's all super important for the technical team to be aligning on, but mostly they're trying to align on that with senior executives and leadership teams and that kind of thing, when most of it's going over their head and they don't get any buy-in, all right? And not talking their language and working with them on that particular front is typically the issues that we see. And again, if you're working with someone that is a senior executive that's extremely technical, understands engineering, all that kind of thing, it's a different story, right? Obviously that's going to be different, but I still think no matter what, you're focusing on that one outcome. I think John Cutler, I don't know if anyone's familiar with John Cutler here, but John Cutler talks about it as the North Star statement, which essentially is, it's the guiding principle for what we're trying to do. And everything, no matter if it's a technical requirement, non-technical, whatever it is, should be moving us towards that direction. So I hope that answers your question.
Awesome, thank you very much. We'll take a couple more.
How do you balance not enough discovery with too much discovery?
I'd probably be a billionaire if I could answer that question exactly like that. It's dependent on, I guess, the project that you're doing, the scale of the project. There's no, I guess, right and wrong with that, but it's as a team you would know from a risk perspective that you've identified all those key things and you know that if we can deliver X, we've had success and we know our constraints, that kind of thing, and we've identified all the risks. I guess I've seen a lot of teams where you say to them, okay, what are you doing? And they say, yeah, we're going to deliver all these features. And it's like, yeah, okay, but what's that going to lead to, if that makes sense? And they don't actually know how that's going to impact the business, even from a process perspective. And I guess a lot of what I'm talking about here is that you might have a designer, and I know this is difficult, but they may have worked in, again, for example, UX design or UI design their whole life and don't truly understand the principles, even the business or the product that they're working on. Then it's very difficult for them to understand how their role and adjust their role and with the work that they do on a daily basis to I guess, deliver that value. And so if you can answer that, even talking about that North Star statement and balance it out, you're always going to find things throughout the project, as we discussed, like going a bit earlier, like there's going to be things that come up. But I guess you don't want nasty surprises, is the way to put it. And you want alignment. That's the key word. Like everyone that can have an opinion at the table is aligned. And if that's the case, then you're done, right? Because you know there's a shared vision for success. If there's 2 missing people from that, you've got a risk, because they could come in next month, 6 months, whatever it is, and say, no, this is not what we wanted, and we need to change this, right? Thank you.
Awesome. We'll take 2 more, maybe.
Yep, no worries.
Awesome. I saw your hand up.
Do you find the particular stakeholder importance changes over the life of the project? And what do you do when you had to make a trade-off earlier and then the balance has sort of shifted for the importance of the stakeholder, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, it's dependent on projects, but yes, they change, right? Absolutely, they change. And again, when we're talking about like senior executive leaders, you're not going to get as much of their time. And once the thing actually starts, the project starts, things go on, then they're probably not going to be nowhere near as involved. And that's why I think it's even more important that you actually have that alignment from the beginning. But yes, it does change. Things can happen, and no doubt probably people will relate to this, where projects, stakeholders have changed as well, right? The role may not have changed, but the person's changed, and then we feel like we're starting all again. And so that's something that you've just got to manage. But again, coming back to what I just said there, but shared alignment, right? As quickly as you possibly can, getting up to speed with everyone. I think that's the most important thing. Thank you.
Awesome. Final question.
There's someone down the front.
Yeah, up the front. Thanks.
G'day. What are the danger signs that make you realise you haven't got the buy-in you need? And has it ever been enough for you to just walk away and say, no, we can't do this?
Yeah, very much so. Someone's attitude towards the project, danger signs from the main thing is that they're doing this because they feel they're doing it for the sake of doing it is one of the biggest things. If there's no real tangible value, for example, if they can't articulate exactly where they're trying to get to from that perspective, then how are we ever going to show them that, if that makes sense? If they don't feel that, we're fighting an uphill battle from day one. And so, yeah, absolutely. There's times where you'd walk away from it and say, we feel you're essentially not in the right space at the moment to be doing this, and or you can't clearly articulate enough what this is going to make this a success for you, which means that we can't necessarily, like, I guess we need to be able to know what we've got to help them with. We can help them understand it and flesh it out a bit more and that kind of thing, but I guess that would be the biggest warning sign to me. And then if there's constant friction and or we're seeing this as well, but if they believe that we know exactly what we need to do, we don't need to do customer research, we don't need to do anything like that, we know exactly what we want, we're going to put this in, then from that perspective I think that's the wrong way to go about it, and we will get the blame later on when it doesn't work, and so we walk away from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we get another round of applause for Julian, please?
Thank you.